I knew this day would come, and today is the day I'm going to disconnect my DiskStation 418. Unfortunately, Synology NAS station has to go back to its owner. Hey guys, after 2 months with Synology DS418, it would be a lie if I told you I wouldn't miss it. Today I'm going to put it back in a box and send it back to Synology UK, which kindly lent me this unit so I could compare it to a couple of other NAS solutions. And there is quite a bit I've learned about this particular unit and how nowadays the consumer grade NAS drives can be actually used for your home and for your less professional needs. And to help you understand my perspective, we have to travel in time about 5 years, because that's how old is this NAS box. I've made it myself actually, based on, as you guessed it, Raspberry Pi, a Raspberry Pi 2 to be precise, and I've been using it for 5 years without a single failure, which is actually quite a bit of a statement. And before you're gonna say like, wait, wasn't the Raspberry Pi 2 limited to 100 megabits per second? Yes it was, but I was mainly using it for slightly different purposes than your usual network storage. I would run a Plex and surf some content, or access my files from a remote connection without actually power on my big and power hungry PC. And that was pretty much what I wanted, and back in then the choice in that matter was rather limited, because inexpensive NAS drives were, well, lacking in functions, and I couldn't afford alternatives. 5 years later, and the situation looks completely different, with nice storage solutions being available for not that much of a price. And one of them is the DiskStation 418, which I was using for the last 2 months to store my data, to work from the drive, and to check out the options available on its, well, I could call it operating system, I guess. And as you can see from the drive I'm actually pulling out from the system, I wasn't exactly using it as a backup solution, but something of a server instead. And I have to say that DS418 is a very capable machine in that regard. It's not to say that I didn't use it as a server, because I actually purchased for this purpose 2 Western Digital 6TB drives, the mechanical ones, and 2 2TB crucial drives to speed up things. And yeah, in my testing it was working quite great, and I'm gonna get back to it in a second. But first, I want to talk to you about what has changed in that 5 years, and how Synology has changed my perception to what is possible right now. With its full-based, which you can load with either SSD or mechanical drives thanks to a quick pull-out tabs, you can fit up to 64 terabytes of data into this box, which is probably more than you would expect to use for an average household. I know a lot of you is gonna scream right now, it's like, I want more data, I want more storage for my data, but let's face it, 64 terabytes, it's still a lot, and it's gonna cost you a pretty penny too. I mean, on my array of drives I spent around £500 already, and that was nearing almost twice the price of this box. Inside you can find interesting hardware as well. You have 4-core CPU capable of 1.4 GHz clock speeds and 2 gigs of RAM. It also has a dual Ethernet port at the back, which you can, they're both gigabits, but you can aggregate them to a total speed of 2 gigs. So that's quite nice if you have an infrastructure to support it. And you have 2 3.2 USB ports for a quick read or saving data from your drive itself. So overall it's a pretty cool machine, and it's not that big. And the built-in transcoding engine assures you that whatever media you're going to be streaming from this, well, you shouldn't have any problems. And I know comparing to your regular desktop PC might not look impressive, but all of that hardware translates into about 50% utilization when actually saturating the gigabyte speed on this machine. Just bear in mind that I don't know how that figure looks like when you're using a link aggregation, because I don't have a supporting infrastructure in my home, so I wasn't really able to test it out. When initially Synology sent that to me, I ran a live stream in which I've unboxed it and set it up at home for my use, and honestly it took about 15 minutes to go through the motions and get my array of 4 drives ready. It was really simple, except from one part when I didn't really discover how to mount SSDs easily, mostly because, well, I don't read the instructions. At this point, the only thing that stood out for me was the noise level coming from the fans. To be honest, they weren't loud, but they were definitely noticeable, and if I was running this box any longer, then I probably would consider swapping the fans for something more quiet. But your mileage might vary, you might as well just hide the box because, well, let's face it, it's not a looker and it's not supposed to be resting on your desk anyway. With everything assembled, I was ready to actually log into the interface and, well, this is where I got pleasantly surprised, because it's not the NAS experience I remember from 5 years ago. And call me severely outdated, and I'm not going to blame you for it, but everything looks really polished and really accessible, which is quite important for any consumer. And I do realize that you could grab an old PC and convert it into a DIY NAS box by installing FreeNAS or maybe OpenMedia Vault. Somehow, in the last 5 years, everything has changed in that spectrum, and now the consumer units, which aren't very expensive, come with a lot of different options that you can repurpose your NAS drive for. These are no longer dedicated network storage machines that, well, are oriented to keep your data safe, but they can serve as physical servers at distributing different services to your local network. And Synology DS418 isn't any different, because you can just open their, I call it online store, the package manager, and start installing different services with a single click. It's super easy, and within a couple of moments you can have stuff like Plex installed for your media streaming server or DLNA services, or if you just want to run your own website, you can simply deploy WordPress and have this hosting entire website for you within a matter of minutes. And in case you don't like moderated list of packages available on Synology, well, store, then you can still use either open source packages available there or simply sideload them from a file. It's very simple, and honestly, I did not expect such a rich environment on the simple NAS box like this. Before we jump into details of setting up your storage pool, optimizing for data redundancy, etc., there's a couple of things you should know. I'm going to look at this box from a perspective of your regular user that is more concerned about having a network storage than advanced backup 3-2-1 solutions to truly protect your data. Now, if you're going to go all hardcore to have your data protected locally and the cloud, etc., then probably a 4-bay drive isn't providing you with necessary redundancy anyway, and you would go for another model. So having a box like that can bring certain benefits and certain improvements to your local network, and I'm going to focus on these aspects rather than just keeping your data safe. Everything from managing your storage pools to setting up different RAID configurations and sending and managing your files, users, everything is very clearly laid out in an interface. I had absolutely no problem finding everything that I wanted to, and even with little previous experience, I was able to set the box up to my needs, which is a good testament to how well organized the OS is. But when it comes to the performance, well, I kind of knew what's gonna happen, mostly because I know I don't have a support for the 2 gig aggregated connection, so that was out of the window, and I knew that the 1 gigabit Ethernet's gonna be my biggest bottleneck here. But I decided to run a couple of benchmarks anyway, starting with local transfers, meaning from disk to disk inside the disk station. These speeds would be responsible for how long it takes to actually clone your data on the second partition, etc. So when I started the transfer of 5 gig file from speedy disk onto this one, I quickly maxed out its sustainable write speed, which was 175 megs per second, which basically tells me it wasn't the box that was slowing me down, but my regular 3.5 inch drive, which I'm going to use because it's faster than my Ethernet speed anyway. And the similar speed was achieved by transferring the file all the way around from the 3.5 mechanical drive into SSD. I was still limited by the maximum read speeds from that drive. Now that I validated that my internal transfer is going to be extremely dependent on what drives I'm going to pick to load this station with, let's move to the external transfers, which is going to be, well, more indicative of how you're going to be interacting or interfacing with your NAS drive. After adding the drives to my local network, I started transferring the same 5 GB file to figure out whether I'm going to saturate my gigabit connection. And it doesn't take genius to figure that out. Yes, within a second I reached out about 113 megabytes per second transfer, which was saturating my Ethernet connection, and that was it. That was the biggest bottleneck in terms of, well, interfacing with a NAS drive like this. But is that fast enough? Well, that purely depends on what you want to do with it. I mean, a gigabit connection is fast enough to stream several different streams at the same time of video files, so you shouldn't have any problems, and a box like that is definitely dedicated for maybe 2 to 3 simultaneous users. So I started with sending one of my older projects to the NAS drive, including the project files and all the videos. Because I edit a lot of files on my local machine, I was really curious if I could continue doing so from NAS drive instead of my local drives mounted in a computer. To make stuff more difficult, I also started a Plex media stream, so it would continuously transcode the video to another computer or the same machine, and I started editing the file that I had stored on the NAS drive on both. One on SSD drive and one on mechanical drive, just to make sure that the drive speed aren't impacting the performance of the box. Even with streaming media in the background, I had no problem scrolling to the timeline and selecting different clips, loading them to the timeline and applying effects. And that with 1080p and 60 frames per second. Now, I haven't tested 4K because I don't have a 4K workload and I'm not really that interested in it. And I think I know that I would struggle, not just because of the NAS drive, but mainly because of the connection speed, which I can't do much about it. But if you're like me and you're limited to 1080p content with 60 frames per second, you'll be absolutely fine. Which right now opens up new avenues of storing data, which is great because I'm running out of space on my computer, and as I already ran out of SATA ports, replacing those drives with a bigger capacity became a very expensive ordeal because I usually have to buy a big drive and I only get half of that capacity back because I store the data. So going with a NAS drive was actually the cheapest solution because I would get entire capacity of that drive back, well, unless I'm going to sacrifice some of that for redundancy. So the last thing to address is probably cost of the device. Now, you'll find DS418 for about 360 to 380 pounds without storage. You can also bundle up with some storage for better deals. Now, yes, you could build a cheaper DIY version of your network storage, but there's going to be a couple of things that you'll be facing, including, well, putting the hardware together, installing operating system, and having a bit of extra knowledge about all of this. Synology makes it incredibly easy to access even the more complex services, and most of them is just, well, deployment is as complicated as clicking on the icon and waiting for the package to download, which is extremely satisfying because you don't spend your time googling stuff, but you can just simply get on with your work. So if you want to find out what's that and how that stacks against the Synology drive, then you know how YouTube works, I don't have to explain all that. But since I don't have a posting schedule, it's best to follow me on a couple of social media so you can always be in touch, ask questions and get the conversation started. So thanks to Synology for sending me a loan so I could take a look at it and get extremely tempted into the world of NAS drives and, well, servers. Yeah, I'll definitely have to reconsider this. Thanks for watching. Bye!